Imagine standing at the very edge of life, your body failing, the world fading, and yet your mind expanding into a vision more vivid than reality itself. This is not a fantasy novel. It is the story of Carl Gustav Jung, the world-renowned Swiss psychiatrist, who, during a critical illness in 1944, nearly crossed into death. What he saw and felt would forever change his understanding of the human soul and inspire generations to rethink what it means to live, to die, and perhaps to return. Part 1. Carl Jung's near-death vision. Scene setting. In February of 1944, Carl Jung was already a man of global reputation. He had pioneered concepts like the collective unconscious and archetypes. He had debated with Sigmund Freud, traveled across continents, and studied mythology, religion, and dreams with a passion few could match. But that winter, Jung suffered a severe heart attack. He was 68 years old, vulnerable, and suddenly brought face to face with death itself. The illness left him bedridden. His doctors feared for his life. For weeks, he hovered between this world and something beyond it. And it was in those suspended hours, when his physical body lay in a hospital bed, that Jung reported visions of astonishing clarity. The out-of-body moment. Jung later described the experience in his autobiography Memories, Dreams, Reflections. He said that he felt himself drifting away from his body, as though his consciousness detached and rose upward. He no longer felt pain, no longer felt confined by the walls of the hospital. Instead, he floated high above the earth, gazing down on the planet itself, bathed in a strange radiance. He saw the earth from space, blue, shimmering, fragile against the vast black cosmos. This was 1944, long before astronauts brought back photographs of the planet from orbit. Jung's description anticipated what would later be called the overview effect, the profound psychological shift astronauts report when they see Earth from above. For Jung, this was not science fiction. It was lived experience. The temple in space. But the vision went further. Jung spoke of drifting toward a massive dark stone, an otherworldly temple or cosmic rock suspended in the void. He sensed it was a place of deep, eternal significance, almost like the entrance to another realm. Inside, he felt, awaited the mystery of existence itself, the source of meaning that lies beyond ordinary human comprehension. As he approached the temple, Jung felt an overwhelming peace. It was as if his personal identity, his burdens, his earthly struggles, all were falling away. He was on the threshold of the eternal. He believed he was about to enter a world where time no longer existed, where the truth of life and death would be revealed. Conflict pulled back to life. Yet, just as Jung prepared to cross into this strange and beautiful domain, something pulled him back. He became aware of a figure, his doctor, calling him, insisting that he could not leave. Jung's earthly body was not finished. His destiny, it seemed, was not complete. Against his will, he felt himself descending, torn from the lightness of the vision, dragged back into the weight of flesh and pain. When he awoke in the hospital bed, he was furious. He later admitted feeling deep disappointment at being forced back into the confines of life. He had touched something magnificent, something utterly real, and he did not want to let it go. The significance. For Jung, this was not merely a hallucination. He was a man of science as well as myth. He analyzed dreams, visions, and symbols his entire career. He believed this experience was a genuine glimpse into the deep structures of human existence. It was not just a personal fantasy, but a universal event, an encounter with the archetypal truth of death and rebirth. What made Jung's account so striking is how it resonated with countless other near-death experiences, NDEs, reported throughout history. People across cultures have spoken of leaving their bodies, seeing light, or encountering cosmic landscapes. But Jung's version carried the weight of his intellectual authority. He was not an anonymous patient. He was one of the greatest psychological thinkers of the 20th century. His testimony forced many to reconsider the boundary between psychology and spirituality. Wider context, science and society. The 1940s were a time when death surrounded Europe. The Second World War was raging, millions were dying, and entire societies were questioning meaning itself. Jung's near-death vision was not just personal, it reflected a collective crisis. His imagery of Earth seen from above seemed almost prophetic, a reminder of the fragility of humanity during an age of destruction. Later, scientists studying NDEs would point to physiological explanations: lack of oxygen to the brain, chemical surges in dying neurons, or hallucinations under trauma. But Jung insisted that, real or not in a medical sense, the meaning of the vision could not be dismissed. He compared it to an initiation rite, an archetypal journey into the mystery of being. So what can we take from the first part of Jung's story? Perhaps this: at the edge of death, the human mind reveals images of extraordinary beauty and significance. Whether we interpret them as neurological events or glimpses into another dimension, they remind us that life itself is more than routine survival. Jung's NDE tells us that even in suffering, the psyche may open a doorway to meaning far greater than our daily struggles. And yet, this is only the beginning. Because Jung's return to life was not peaceful, the visions did not leave him unchanged. They haunted him, inspired him, and reshaped the way he thought about humanity's future. Part 2. The Return and the Burden of Life. In our last chapter, Carl Jung hovered between life and death. His spirit seemed to soar beyond the earth, glimpsing a vast cosmic temple that radiated eternal mystery. He was ready to cross over. And yet, he was pulled back, forced to return to a body racked with pain. But what happened next was not a smooth return to ordinary life. For Jung, coming back to the world of the living was almost unbearable. He would later confess that surviving felt, at first, like a cruel punishment. And yet, it was within this painful struggle that some of his most profound insights were born. The pain of survival. When Jung opened his eyes in the hospital, the first thing he felt was disappointment. He did not rejoice at survival. He did not thank his doctors. Instead, he was angry that he had been torn away from what he believed was the threshold of truth. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung wrote that everyday reality now seemed unreal. The hospital room, the nurses, the visitors all appeared like shadows, pale imitations of the luminous reality he had experienced in his vision. He described life itself as feeling like a prison, his body a painful shell compared to the freedom he had tasted. For months, he remained weak, drifting in and out of consciousness. But inwardly, he was changed. He said that his soul had touched something eternal, and that knowledge gave him both deep peace and unbearable longing. A shift in perspective. What is striking is how this near-death state altered Jung's view of existence. Before his illness, Jung had already been fascinated by myths of death and rebirth. But now those myths were no longer abstract ideas. They were lived reality. He compared himself to ancient initiates, those who passed through symbolic death rituals in mystery cults of Greece or Egypt. Like them, he had gone down into the underworld and returned. And because of this, he felt set apart from the rest of humanity. He wrote that his patients, his colleagues, even his family seemed to live in a dream compared to the clarity he had seen. For them, life was the whole of existence. For Jung, life was only a small island surrounded by a vast sea of mystery, the archetypal dimension. Jung was careful not to claim he had proof of an afterlife. He was too much a scientist to make dogmatic statements. But he believed the imagery he saw the Earth from space, the cosmic temple, were not random hallucinations. They were archetypal symbols, expressions of the deep collective unconscious shared by all humanity. The Earth, shining in the void, represented the fragile unity of human life. The temple, massive and eternal, symbolized the timeless truth of existence, something larger than any individual. In Jung's view, near-death experiences were not simply personal fantasies. They were encounters with the deepest patterns of the psyche, patterns that spoke of eternity. Context: society after the war. It is important to remember that Jung's experience happened in 1944, when Europe was collapsing under the weight of World War II. Cities lay in ruins, millions were dead, and questions of meaning haunted everyone. When Jung later spoke of his NDE, it resonated deeply with a world desperate for hope. In a time when death was everywhere, his testimony offered something extraordinary: the idea that even in death there may be vision, beauty, and meaning. To many, this was a powerful counterpoint to the despair of the age. The long recovery. Jung's physical recovery took months. He was fragile, unable to work as he once had. But he spent these months writing, sketching, and reflecting. Out of this period came some of his most profound late works, where themes of death, rebirth, and the destiny of the soul became central. He no longer feared death. In fact, he said that death now appeared to him as a fulfillment, a goal rather than an end. This was a radical shift from the fear and denial that so often surround mortality in modern society. Personal cost. But let us not romanticize too much. For Jung, the return was hard. He confessed to feeling alienated from daily life. Ordinary conversations seemed shallow. Daily tasks felt meaningless. He admitted to feeling lonely, carrying an experience that few could understand. This is something many survivors of near-death experiences report even today. They feel set apart, unable to communicate what they have seen. Some fall into depression, others into silence. Jung, however, chose to transform the pain into insight. He shared his story, not to convince others of an afterlife, but to encourage them to search for meaning within their own lives. And here lies the lesson of this chapter. Survival is not always easy. Sometimes, returning to life after touching death can feel like exile. But Jung's response shows us that the burden of survival can also be a gift. By enduring, he carried back insights that shaped the world's understanding of the human spirit. In his suffering, Jung discovered that life itself is a question, not something to be taken for granted, but something to be lived with depth, courage, and awareness of its fragility. But Jung's story does not end here. In Part 3, we'll explore how his near-death vision influenced his later writings, his view of humanity's future, and his ultimate understanding of death as life's great completion. And we'll ask, what do Jung's visions reveal about our own path as a species standing between despair and transcendence? Stay with me, because the final chapter is where Jung's vision touches not only the fate of one man, but of all humanity. Part 3, the final meaning. Carl Jung had looked upon eternity. He had seen the earth from the heavens, felt the pull of a cosmic temple, and touched the silence of death. Yet he was forced back into the fragile vessel of his body, angry, disappointed, but forever transformed. Now the question became, what do you do after seeing death and returning to life? For Jung, the answer shaped not only his final years, but also the way millions of people would think about life, mortality, and the destiny of the human spirit. A man changed forever. After his recovery, Jung confessed that he no longer saw life as he once did. The world was not merely a stage of ambitions, possessions, and conflicts. It was temporary, a passage, a preparation for something greater. He told his students and colleagues that death was not an abrupt end but a goal, a natural culmination of existence. To him, living was like walking toward a distant mountain. Death was not destruction, but arrival. This radical perspective influenced his final works, where he often spoke of the psyche as something larger than the body, something that reaches beyond time and space. Visions and symbols. The images Jung encountered during his NDE became powerful metaphors in his writings. The earth from above reminded him of humanity's fragile unity. From that cosmic distance, nations and wars seemed absurd. Life appeared as one interconnected whole. The cosmic stone temple symbolized the eternal, the archetypal truth that lies beyond human comprehension. It was not just for him. It was for everyone, a symbol of the journey each soul must face. Through these images, Jung began to argue that our lives are embedded in a much larger tapestry, one woven not only by biology and society, but by meaning itself. The influence of his experience. Jung did not preach religion. He did not claim to have proof of the afterlife. Instead, he encouraged people to reflect on their inner lives, their dreams, their myths. He believed that the psyche, when faced with death, reveals its archetypal depths. For scientists, this raised questions. Was Jung's vision simply the product of a brain starved of oxygen? Modern neurologists point out that NDEs often occur under similar conditions: altered brain chemistry, trauma, and near cardiac arrest. Yet for Jung, the meaning was more important than the mechanism. Even if the brain created the images, he argued, why these images? Why a temple? Why earth seen from above? Why symbols of eternity rather than random chaos? For Jung, The archetypes that surfaced in his NDE pointed towards something timeless, something larger than physiology, society, and mortality. In the years after World War II, humanity faced existential dread, nuclear weapons, the fragility of civilization, and the scars of mass death. Jung's account of his NDE resonated deeply. Here was not just a man of faith, but a man of science and psychology, saying that death itself may carry meaning. It inspired many to reconsider their own mortality. Jung reframed death not as annihilation, but as fulfillment, an idea that brought comfort to a world scarred by loss. Personal reflections in old age. As Jung aged, he spoke more openly about his near-death vision. He admitted that life after the experience often felt unreal, as though he was living in two worlds at once, the ordinary one of daily routines and the eternal one he had glimpsed. Yet instead of withdrawing, he used this dual perspective to help others. He continued to teach, to write, and to encourage his patients to face their own mortality with courage. He wanted people to see that the fear of death could be transformed into wisdom about life. The universal question: what does Jung's story tell us, decades later? Whether we see his vision as a spiritual revelation or as the poetry of a dying brain, it carries a universal message. That there is something within us, call it psyche, soul, or consciousness, that longs for meaning beyond survival. And that even at the edge of death, human beings are not met only with darkness, but often with symbols of peace, beauty, and truth. Here lies the final lesson. To live fully, we must live with death in mind. Jung's NDE teaches us that when we accept mortality, life gains depth. Each moment becomes precious, each relationship sacred, each choice meaningful. He once wrote, "As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being." His brush with death made that truth burn brighter. Closing reflection. So when you hear Jung's story, ask yourself, what would you do if you had glimpsed eternity? Would you live differently? Would you fear less? Would you love more? Carl Jung's near-death vision was not just about one man's survival. It was about the human journey we all share, the journey toward meaning, through suffering, and ultimately, toward the great mystery that awaits us all. And perhaps, as Jung discovered, death is not the end. It may be, in fact, our final homecoming.